The wind came howling down from the ridges, carrying with it the bitter scent of pine and the taste of iron from the storm rolling over the Wyoming highlands. Eli Cartwright pressed his shoulder against the cabin door until it latched, listening to the rafters groan. He had seen plenty of storms in his 30-odd years, but there was a violence in this one that stirred something uneasy in him. The lightning split the sky in crooked forks, lighting up the valley for a breathless moment, before darkness crashed back down with the thunder. That was when he heard it. Wood splintering, the frantic shriek of horses, and then a heavy crash inside the barn. Eli grabbed his lantern and rifle, boots sinking into mud as he trudged across the yard. Before we find out who's hiding in Eli's barn this stormy night, make sure to subscribe for more unforgettable frontier stories. He pushed open the barn door, the lantern's glow trembling across scattered hay and spooked animals. One mare stamped the ground, nostrils flaring. In the far corner, half collapsed against a feed trough, was a figure so out of place it made Eli's breath catch. A woman, though not just any woman. She was tall, shoulders broad beneath a rain-soaked dress torn at the seams. Her hair, dark with mud and rain, clung to her face as she struggled to lift her head. Her skin was cut and bruised, her breath ragged. "Don't call the law," she rasped, voice raw with fear. "Please, don't." Eli kept the rifle steady, though unease twisted in his gut. He had lived long enough in the mountains to know when someone was running, and everything about this stranger screamed flight. He measured her with his eyes, wary and silent, before answering. "You break into my barn, near scare my stock to death, and tell me not to call the sheriff. You've got some explaining to do." Her eyes, a strange gray that caught the lantern light, met his. They carried a desperation deeper than the storm outside. "If the law finds me, he finds me, and if he finds me, I'd rather die here in the hay than go back." The storm rattled the boards above them, wind pushing through the cracks. Eli lowered the rifle an inch, torn between suspicion and the memory of nights when he too had begged God for mercy no one would give. "Name?" he asked curtly. "Mara," she whispered, voice catching. "Mara Lindstrom." The name meant nothing to him, but the way she clutched at her side, he saw the swelling there, the blood matting her dress, forced his hand. Eli cursed under his breath, slung the rifle back, and set the lantern on a hook. He crouched, his calloused hands rough but surprisingly careful, as he helped her sit upright. "You're hurt bad." "You'll not last the night if you keep bleeding." Her lips trembled into something like a bitter smile. "I've lasted worse." Outside, thunder rolled so hard the barn quaked. Eli stared at her, studying every edge of her strange presence. A giant of a woman, broad and tall as any man he'd met, but fragile in that moment, shivering in soaked fabric and half-conscious. His instinct screamed to throw her out, to lock the barn and let the storm wash her away. Trouble followed women like this, trouble that burned homes and left graves. But another part of him, the part he had tried to bury under solitude and silence, wouldn't let go. With a grunt, Eli lifted her arm over his shoulder and half-dragged, half-carried her toward the cabin. She was heavier than she looked, though not in a way that slowed him, more in a way that made him marvel at the strength hidden in her frame. By the time he eased her onto the cabin cot, sweat lined his brow despite the cold draft sneaking under the door. He covered her with a wool blanket, watching her shiver. She caught his hand before he could pull away. "You don't understand," she murmured, eyelids fluttering shut. "If he finds me, he won't stop." The storm bellowed outside, the roof shaking under rain, as Eli Cartwright stood over a stranger whose presence promised nothing but chaos. Yet, against every instinct that had kept him alive this long, he had let her in. And with that choice, the storm inside his barn had only just begun. The storm had quieted by dawn, leaving behind a world dripping with silver threads of water sliding off the pine boughs. Mist clung to the slopes, and the valley floor looked like a wet quilt stitched from mud and stone. Eli Cartwright rose early, as he always did, pulling on his boots and stepping into the silence of a morning where every sound carried too sharp. Behind him, inside the one-room cabin, the stranger lay curled beneath his blanket. Mara. He stirred the fire back to life, not out of courtesy, but out of habit. Years of solitude had carved him into a man of routine, each task precise, each motion deliberate. It kept his mind from straying where it ought not go, back to memories that twisted his gut like barbed wire. By the time the kettle hissed, she stirred, blinking into the pale light that spilled through the cracks in the shutters. Her voice was hoarse. "Why help me at all?" Eli didn't look up from the tin cup he filled. "Couldn't let you bleed out on my floor. Don't read more into it." She shifted under the blanket, grimacing at the pain in her side. "You don't trust me." "Trust?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Lady, I don't trust anyone, not anymore." He handed her the cup, and though her hands were larger than most women's, they trembled against the heat. She sipped, watching him with eyes that seemed to see through the wall he'd built around himself. Eli busied himself with splitting kindling, the steady rhythm of the axe biting into wood. But his thoughts slipped. He remembered another morning years ago when his wife Clara had sat at that same table, her belly swollen with child, humming while the coffee boiled. The cabin had been warm then, filled with laughter, until childbirth had taken her. Until fever had taken his boy Benji, before the lad had lived to see his 5th year. That was the day trust had died in Eli Cartwright. Trust in God, in law, in people. What good had it done? A man could open his heart, but all it meant was giving the world something to rip out. So he had retreated to the mountains, trading company for silence, grief for hard labor. He set down the axe, sweat beading despite the cool morning. Mara watched him, her expression unreadable. "You've known loss," she said softly. Eli stiffened. "Don't go poking where you don't belong." "I wasn't," she replied. I know the look of a man who's buried more than one piece of his heart." Her words landed heavy. He wanted to snap back, to silence her with coldness, but instead he only muttered, "Eat your bread and drink your coffee. You'll need strength to walk out when you can." Her gaze flicked toward the door, rain still dripping from the eaves. "And if I don't want to walk out?" "That's not my problem," he answered, jaw tightening. "You brought trouble here." "Trouble's not something I make a habit of inviting." Silence stretched, broken only by the crack of the fire. Mara finally nodded, but there was a stubborn light in her eyes. She wasn't planning to vanish easily. Eli turned away, reaching for his rifle to check the sight. He needed the weight of it in his hands, something solid to remind him of control. But even as he polished the barrel, he couldn't shake the sound of her voice in the night. "If he finds me, he won't stop." The question gnawed at him. Who was she truly running from? And why did it feel like her shadow had already begun to spread over his life, filling corners he'd sworn never to touch again? He set the rifle down, unease building in his chest. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone, but trust or no trust, Mara Lindstrom had stepped across his threshold, and the past had taught him one truth. When a storm came down from the ridges, you couldn't outwalk it. You had to face it. The morning sun cut through the mist, spreading long beams across the valley, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. Eli stepped outside with his rifle slung low, scanning the tree line out of habit. The storm had left the ground soft, and every track stood out clear as scripture on a page. That was when he saw them, boot prints, deep and wide, circling too close to the cabin. He crouched, tracing the edges with his hand. Not his boots, not Mara's either. These were heavier, the stride purposeful. Someone had been there, maybe during the night, maybe just after dawn. His gut tightened like a rope being pulled too hard. When he came back in, Mara sat at the table, a strip of cloth pressed against her ribs. She looked up, reading the sharpness in his face before he spoke. "What is it?" "Tracks," he answered flatly. "Man's boots, too close for comfort." Her knuckles whitened around the cloth. She didn't ask what kind, didn't feign ignorance. Instead, her shoulders sagged as though a weight she carried had grown heavier. "Then he's looking already." Eli narrowed his eyes. "Who?" She hesitated, then pushed herself upright, towering a head above even him, though her injury kept her leaning against the chair. "You want the truth? Fine. I was meant to be married off like cattle to a man with more land than mercy. Jedediah Tucker. He owns half the valley down toward the plains." Eli knew the name. Everyone in Wyoming knew Tucker, a cattle baron with money to burn and fists that bought silence. His crews drove herds through other folks' land as though law and boundaries were smoke in the wind. "You ran from Tucker," Eli said, voice low. "I ran from being chained," Mara answered, her grey eyes flashing. "My father signed me over. Tucker saw me as property, as a body strong enough to bear sons. I refused to be broken like that." Her words struck a chord, bitter and sharp. Eli leaned back, the old boards creaking beneath his boots. He had no love for men who claimed power through fear. Yet he also knew what kind of trouble followed when you stood in their way. "So you left," he muttered. "I left," she confirmed, "and I'll keep leaving until I'm free." But he won't quit. Men like him don't. For a long moment, the cabin filled only with the crackle of the fire and the slow drip of water outside. Eli's thoughts twisted. He had wanted a quiet life, far from the reach of men like Tucker. Now, by opening his door, he'd invited the storm straight into his cabin. "You should have kept riding," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Her mouth hardened. "I collapsed in your barn. Do you think I planned that? I would have died out there in the mud." Her defiance stirred something inside him, not anger exactly, but a reminder of what it meant to stand one's ground. He recognized it because he'd once carried the same fire before grief had smothered it. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "All right. But if you're staying here, you follow my rules. No wandering, no drawing attention, and no lies. If I catch one whiff of dishonesty, you're gone. Clear, clear," she said, and though her voice trembled with exhaustion, her eyes held steady. Eli studied her once more. This woman had walked out on one of the most dangerous men in Wyoming, and now she sat in his cabin, half broken yet unbent. Trouble had found him whether he liked it or not. Outside, the prince waited in the mud, silent proof that Tucker's shadow already stretched up the mountain. And Eli Cartwright knew shadows had a way of lengthening with every passing day. In the heart of town, far below Eli's mountain refuge, the saloon doors swung open under the heavy hand of Jedediah Tucker. He filled the threshold like a storm cloud, broad-chested and red-faced, the silver tips of his boots clinking against the wooden floor. Conversations dipped low, and men turned their eyes away, for Tucker's temper was a thing no one wished to stir. "Drink," he barked at the bar hand, slamming a fist so hard against the counter that the glasses rattled. "And news. Don't sit there looking dumb." "Where is she?" The bar hand swallowed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ain't seen her, Mr. Tucker, not here. Folks say she might have gone north." "North?" Tucker cut him off, his voice curling with mockery. "You mean into those God-forsaken hills where only hermits and wolves make their dens?" His laugh was harsh, but his eyes burned. "If she thinks she can vanish, she underestimates me." At a corner table, Sheriff Silas Boone nursed a cup of bitter coffee. His badge caught the lantern light, a reminder of law in a place where law bent easily under the weight of wealth. He set down the cup and rose, walking slow, careful not to show nerves. "Tucker," Silas said evenly, "your fiancé's absence don't give you right to tear through town like a cyclone. Folks got their own peace to keep." Tucker turned, his grin sharp as broken glass. "Fiancé? Don't soften it, Sheriff. She's mine, promised and signed. And when a man's property runs off, what kind of fool lawman tells him to sit quiet?" Silas kept his hand near his holster, though not on it. "No person's property. You know that. If Mara left, she had her reasons. I'd suggest you let her be." The saloon fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke. Tucker leaned close, his breath sour with whiskey. "Careful, Boone. You wear a star, but you're still just a man, and men who meddle in my business tend to vanish." Silas didn't flinch, though the threat cut deep. He knew Tucker wasn't all bluster. Men had disappeared before, men who crossed him, their names whispered only when the wind howled through the cottonwoods. Tucker turned back to the room, raising his voice. "Hear me, all of you. She's out there, tall as a fence post, hair black as a crow's wing. Any man brings me word of her will earn more than a year's wages. Any man hides her." He slammed his fist on the bar again. "Will answer to me. A murmur spread, uneasy, but no one met his eyes. In places like this, silence bought survival. After Tucker stormed out, the room exhaled in one long breath. Sheriff Silas lingered, staring into the dregs of his coffee. He knew then that Mara Lindstrom's flight had already lit a fuse. Tucker's reach stretched farther than the town limits, farther than the law could guard. And if Mara had found shelter in the mountains, whoever stood with her would inherit Tucker's wrath. Silas muttered under his breath, "Eli, you stubborn fool, you best keep your rifle close." Outside, the cattle baron mounted his horse, his men falling in behind like shadows. The clatter of hooves echoed down the main street, a warning to every homesteader and drifter alike. Jedediah Tucker was hunting, and when he hunted, the whole valley trembled. Far away, up in the high country, Eli didn't yet know the storm rolling toward him carried more than just the weight of one man's fury. It carried the fury of power, money, and vengeance, and it had just been unleashed. The mountain air was sharp, clean, but carried a chill that slid easily into bone. Mara sat at the table, her face pale as she pressed a hand to her side. Eli watched her movements, uneasy. She was tough, too tough for her own good. But even toughness had its limits, and the wound she carried was festering. He knew it. "You're walking crooked," he muttered, breaking bread and setting it in front of her. "That wound's not healing right. I've managed worse," she answered, though the strain in her voice betrayed her. Eli shook his head. "You'll not manage infection. That'll take you down faster than Tucker ever could." At the sound of the name, her lips pressed tight, as though to cage the fear that threatened to slip out. Eli didn't press. He hated himself for it, but part of him cared, more than he wished. By late morning, Eli hitched the mule, deciding on a course that felt reckless even as he set out. "We're going into town," he said. Mara frowned. "That's a death wish. His men—" "They won't expect it," Eli cut in, "and we're not going to the saloon, we're going to Marjorie." Mara blinked. "Who?" "Widow Allen. Midwife, healer, tougher than most men I've met. She'll fix that side before it kills you." The road into town was quiet, the sky stretching wide and blue above, but every crack of a branch in the brush made Mara stiffen. She walked with determination, despite the pain, her steps heavy, her jaw set. Eli couldn't help but notice her resilience, a kind he hadn't seen in years. When they reached Marjorie Allen's homestead on the edge of town, the smell of sage and dried herbs drifted from the porch. The old woman opened the door before Eli even knocked, her eyes bright despite her years. "Cartwright," she said, squinting. "Didn't expect to see you unless you'd gone and lost a limb." "Who's this tower of a girl?" Mara flushed faintly, towering over the widow even as she leaned against the doorframe for balance. Eli's mouth twitched. "She needs tending. Took a bad hit to the ribs." Marjorie ushered them inside without another word. The shelves were crowded with jars, bundles of dried plants, and the warm scent of broth simmered in the corner. Mara sat stiffly while Marjorie peeled back the bandages Eli had done with his rough hands. The wound was angry, swollen, edges red. Marjorie clucked her tongue. "You patched her like you'd patch a saddle, Eli. No wonder she's hurting. Hold still, girl." Mara tried to bite back a hiss as Marjorie cleaned the cut with something that burned sharp as fire. "You've a strong frame," Marjorie said. "But even strong trees rot if left unattended. You keep still and let me work." For the first time in days, Mara's voice softened. "Thank you." Marjorie glanced at her, measuring, then gave a small nod. "I've seen women run before. Takes more courage than most men carry, you've got that look." Mara's eyes flicked to the floor, shame and pride wrestling within her. "I was tired of being owned." Marjorie's gaze sharpened. "Men like Tucker don't stop, they escalate. You've got to be ready for that. Running buys time, but it doesn't end the fight." Eli felt those words strike deep, like iron against stone. He'd thought of Mara as a burden, a storm he hadn't asked for, but Marjorie saw something else, a woman who had already chosen to resist, no matter the cost. When they left, the sun had started its slow drop toward the horizon. Mara walked straighter, her wound freshly bound, her face steadier, but the widow's words lingered in the air, heavy as the mountains themselves. and Eli, for the first time in years, wondered if maybe solitude wasn't the only way to survive. By the time Eli and Mara reached the ridge that overlooked his homestead, dusk had set fire to the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. But down in the hollow where the cabin stood, another fire already raged. Smoke billowed upward, thick and black, curling into the evening air. Eli froze, his jaw tightening, the sight cutting through him like a blade. The cabin, his cabin, was burning. Flames licked the roof, beams groaning before collapsing inward. The barn's doors stood wide open, horses gone, chickens scattered. Mara gripped his arm, her voice low. "It's Tucker." Eli's chest burned hotter than the flames below. He clenched his fists, rage rising like a tide he couldn't control. Damn him! For a moment he wanted nothing more than to storm down, rifle blazing, to drag the truth out of whoever had done it. But years of survival whispered caution. Men like Tucker didn't move alone. If the cabin was burning, it wasn't just revenge. It was a message. Mara's face was pale in the firelight, the smoke making her cough. "You can't go down there. He wants you to." Eli's breath came heavy. Memories of Clara in that cabin, her laughter echoing in its walls, and of little Benji running barefoot across those floorboards, gone now, turned to ash. He swallowed hard, his voice like gravel. "Everything I had left of them." He took it. Mara's hand pressed firm against his sleeve, steadying him. "Not everything. You're still breathing. And so am I." Her words cut through the fury, not soft but sharp enough to ground him. He forced himself to look away from the blaze, to the darkening horizon where the land stretched endless and unforgiving. If they stayed, Tucker's men would find them. The fire had been no accident. It was a warning that the mountains were no longer safe. Eli gritted his teeth. "We'll need shelter. There's an old trapper's hut upriver, abandoned years back. It'll do." They moved quickly, shadows sliding between pines as the fire's glow lit the valley behind them. Mara stumbled once, her ribs still raw from the wound, but she refused to slow. Eli kept close, scanning the dark edges of the woods, rifle ready. Every crack of a branch, every cry of a night bird felt like a threat. When they reached the hut, the place was as he remembered, a crooked roof, moss creeping up the logs, but 4 walls and a fireplace that hadn't yet fallen apart. Mara collapsed onto a rough bench, exhaustion pulling her down, but her eyes stayed sharp. "You'll go after him, won't you?" she asked. Eli didn't answer right away. He stoked a small fire in the hearth, his hands trembling from more than the cold. Finally he said, "I'll defend what's mine. But running headlong into Tucker's men is suicide. I've seen enough death to know better." She studied him, the firelight carving shadows across her face. "You've also seen enough to know a man like him won't quit unless he's stopped." Their gazes locked, tension simmering in the silence. Eli looked away first, staring into the flames that licked the dry wood. He had lost everything once. The question clawed at him. Could he bear to lose again, or would this time be different? Outside, the night deepened, coyotes howling on the far ridges. The mountains felt smaller now, hemmed in by smoke and shadows. The cabin that had been Eli's refuge was gone, reduced to ash by the hand of a man who believed himself untouchable, and Eli Cartwright, for the first time in years, felt the old fire of vengeance stirring in his blood. The trapper's hut creaked in the wind, its roof patched with moss and bark, its walls scarred by years of storms. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and in the mountains that was enough. Eli rose early, as he always did, gathering kindling and checking snares. Mara, slower from her healing ribs, busied herself with what little fabric and thread Marjorie had pressed into her hands before they'd left town. By midday, Eli returned with a pair of rabbits strung on his belt. He found her hunched over the rough table, long fingers threading a needle through torn fabric. She looked up, hair falling loose over her shoulder. "You sew?" he asked, setting the rabbits down. Mara's lips curved, though faintly. "A girl raised in a farmstead learns quick. Dresses don't mend themselves, besides." She smoothed the cloth in her lap. "Keeping hands busy keeps the mind from running too far." Eli grunted, skinning the rabbits with steady movements. "You'd do well out here, then. Work's never done, and quiet's the only company most days." "Quiet," Mara echoed. "I've had plenty of that, even in a house full of people. Different kind, though." He glanced at her, catching a shadow in her expression. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't pry. Still, the thought lingered. A woman as tall and strong as her, yet forced into silence by the people meant to call her kin. As the day stretched, Mara stitched steadily, her tall frame bent over delicate work that seemed almost too small for her hands. By evening, she had repaired 2 shirts and started a quilt from scraps. Eli watched her work by the firelight, her focus unshaken even when her ribs ached. "You've a patient hand," he said at last. Her eyes flicked to him, curious. "And you carve," she said, nodding toward the small wooden figure sitting on the shelf. A bear, roughly shaped, smoothed by time. Eli stiffened. He hadn't realized she'd noticed. "Just something I do." "Someone taught you," she pressed gently. He hesitated, then admitted, "For my boy. Benji. He liked toys, small things to carry in his pocket." The air thickened between them. Mara's voice softened. "He's gone?" Eli nodded once, his jaw hard. "Years now." Mara's hand paused on the quilt, her gaze steady. "I'm sorry." The words were simple, not pitying, and for that he was grateful. He poked the fire, the crackle filling the silence. His chest felt tight, as though her presence had stirred dust in rooms he'd locked long ago. Later, Mara stood, stretching her long limbs. She draped the quilt in progress over the bench. "We'll need it." Nights bite harder up here. Eli studied the patchwork, uneven but sturdy. He felt something stir, a memory of warmth, of family, of belonging. It unsettled him as much as it comforted. "You don't plan on leaving soon," he remarked. Mara met his eyes. "Would you have me go?" He swallowed, the words caught in his throat. Finally he muttered, "Not tonight." Her faint smile held no triumph, only quiet acknowledgement. "Then I'll sew, and you'll trap. We'll keep each other's hands busy." The fire burned low, shadows flickering against the log walls. Eli lay awake longer than usual, listening to the soft scrape of needle and thread, the rhythm oddly soothing. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that tonight in that small hut silence didn't feel quite so empty. The morning broke cold and brittle, frost clinging to the pine needles like tiny shards of glass. Eli stepped out of the hut with his rifle, eyes sweeping the ridge. The woods were too still, the silence pressed too tight. He'd lived long enough in the mountains to know when danger was sniffing around. By noon he had his answer. A rider came fast up the river trail, not Tucker, but Sheriff Silas Boone. The man pulled his horse short, breath steaming in the chill, his face etched with worry. "Eli," Silas said, sliding down, "I shouldn't be here. If Tucker's men catch me near, they'll say I'm playing sides." "You are," Eli replied, leaning on his rifle. Silas's eyes hardened, but his voice dropped. Words out. Tucker posted a bounty. Mara's head for gold, dead or alive. Behind Eli, Mara appeared in the doorway, tall frame casting a long shadow inside the hut. Her jaw clenched. "How much?" Silas glanced at her, hesitant, then answered. "Enough to turn neighbors into hunters. Men who'd never raise a gun for Tucker will raise it for coin. He made sure of that." Eli's stomach twisted. He knew what desperation did to a man. In lean winters, hunger could drive a friend to betrayal, and now Tucker's money would spread hunger of a different kind. Mara crossed her arms, her voice steady but sharp. "So, I'm worth more dead than alive." "That's what he thinks of me." Silas shook his head. "No, girl, he wants you alive if he can have you. Dead only if there's no other way. Either way he wins. The law's thin out here, and Tucker's reach long." Eli stepped closer, his voice edged with steel. "Then you should be doing your damn job, Silas, protecting her." "I'm doing what I can," Silas shot back, frustration flashing. "But you know how it works? My badge buys me less than Tucker's purse. I came to warn you, Eli, not because I want to, but because I owe you. You've got to keep her hidden. Don't come to town. Don't linger near trails. His men are watching." The weight of the words settled heavy between them. Mara's shoulders were rigid, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, quickly smothered by anger. "Let him come," she said. "I won't crawl back." Silas's gaze softened, though sorrow crept into it. "You've got courage, girl, but courage alone won't stop men with rifles and greed in their eyes." Eli put a hand on the doorframe, steadying himself against the flood of thoughts. The cabin had already burned. His peace had already been stripped bare. Now every rustle of branches might be a bounty hunter lining up a shot. He looked to Silas. "You risked much coming here. Go before they trail you." Silas nodded, tightening his reins. "Keep your powder dry, Eli, and don't mistake shadows for safety." With that, he mounted and rode back into the trees. Mara lingered in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "You could give me up. Collect the coin yourself. No one would blame you." Eli turned to her, his face hardening. "I've buried enough regrets to last me a lifetime. Selling you out won't be one of them." Her grey eyes met his, and for the first time since she'd stumbled into his barn, something softened there. Not trust yet, but the beginnings of it, fragile as frost on pine. Eli looked back toward the woods, every shadow now carrying weight. Trouble was no longer circling. Trouble was closing in. The forest that morning was wrong, too quiet, the air holding its breath. Eli knew the signs. Predators didn't always have fur and teeth. Sometimes they carried rifles and rode for coin. He was crouched by the riverbank, checking a snare when the sound came. Not the shuffle of deer or the chatter of squirrels. Boots, more than one pair, crunching on gravel upstream. Eli's hand tightened on his rifle. He didn't look back toward the hut. He already knew Mara would be near the fire, sewing or tending her ribs. No time to warn her. 3 men stepped into view, rifles slung casual but eyes sharp. One, broad with a scar splitting his cheek, grinned when he spotted Eli. "Cartwright, mighty quiet place you picked to hole up. Shame it ain't quiet enough." Eli rose slow, keeping the rifle low but ready. "Don't know you," he said evenly. "You don't need to. We're here for the woman." The scarred man spit into the dirt. "You hand her over, we walk away. Tucker'll see you're left alone. You stand in the way." His smile widened. "Well, you won't stand long." Eli's jaw set. He'd faced wolves in the dead of winter, storms that buried cabins whole, but the look in these men's eyes chilled him deeper. Hunger for coin made men reckless. Before he could answer, the hut door creaked. Mara stepped out, tall and unflinching despite the pallor of her face. She had no weapon in hand, only the quilt draped across her shoulders like armor. Her voice rang clear. "You'll not take me." The scarred man chuckled. "Look at that. She's got bark, but bark don't stop bullets." Eli stepped in front of her, rifle raised. "She's under my roof. You want her, you'll go through me." For a moment silence held, thick as molasses. Then the men moved, not with words, but with the sharp intent of wolves closing on prey. The first shot split the air. Eli fired back, bark exploding from a pine trunk as a bullet whined past. Mara grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the river. "You'll never hold them here." Reluctance burned, but she was right. 3 rifles against 1 wasn't a fight, it was suicide. Eli shoved her ahead, both of them crashing through brush, boots sinking into wet earth. Bullets tore the air behind them, branches snapping, the men shouting. They scrambled into the river, icy water biting at their legs. Eli yanked Mara along, his grip iron. "Keep moving." Her stride faltered when the rock slickened. She stumbled, pain flashing across her face as her ankle twisted beneath her. She gasped, catching herself on Eli's shoulder, teeth gritted. "I can't." "You can," he barked, hauling her forward. He didn't let her fall. The river carried them downstream, its roar drowning the pursuit for a blessed moment. But Eli knew they hadn't shaken the hunters, only bought time. He dragged Mara onto the far bank, chest heaving. Her ankles swelled, ugly and red. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled. Eli knelt beside her, pressing his forehead to hers for the briefest second, a desperate grounding. "I'll carry you." "You can't." "I can." His arms slid beneath her, lifting her tall frame as though it were nothing but another burden to shoulder. His muscles screamed, but he held firm. Behind them, voices rose, faint but closing. The hunt wasn't over. But as Eli staggered into the cover of the trees, Mara's arms looped around his neck, her breath hot against his skin. For the first time in years, Eli Cartwright wasn't running for himself. He was running for someone else's life. The night was a blanket of silence, stitched with stars that glimmered cold and unblinking. Eli laid Mara down beneath a stand of aspens, their white trunks gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Her ankle was swollen, her face pale with exhaustion, but her jaw remained set. She refused to look broken, though the chase had nearly undone them both. Eli crouched, pulling a strip of cloth from his pack to bind her ankle. His hands were rough, practiced from years of work, but they trembled as he tied the knot. He didn't want to admit the truth. Even a mountain man had limits, and tonight had pushed him close. Mara's voice cut through the quiet. "You should have left me." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Don't speak nonsense." "It's not nonsense," she pressed, her tone fierce despite the weakness in her body. 3 men with rifles at our backs, and you chose to carry me. That choice could have killed you." Eli leaned back on his heels, his breath heavy. "And what? Let Tucker's dogs drag you back to him? No, Mara, I've buried enough ghosts. I won't dig another grave while I've got the strength to stop it." She studied him, her grey eyes searching his face as though weighing the truth in his words. Slowly, her shoulders eased. "You've lost before." The admission stung, but Eli didn't look away. A wife. A boy. Fever took them both. Since then, I figured I'd keep my heart locked up where nothing could reach it. Easier to lose what you never had. The aspens whispered in the wind, and for a while neither spoke. Then Mara reached for his hand, her grip strong despite her trembling fingers. "You think hiding from life protects you, Eli? It doesn't. It just makes the years colder." Her words pressed against something deep inside him, a place he'd bricked over long ago. He wanted to resist, but the truth in her tone cracked the stone. He exhaled, voice low. "Maybe I don't know how to live different." She leaned closer, her breath mingling with his in the cool night air. "Then learn." With me. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to the moment that shifted everything between them. Eli's chest tightened, not with grief this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. He wanted to believe her, to believe that after years of emptiness, life could still give instead of only taking. Her lips curved, faint but sure, as she whispered words that would etch themselves into him forever. "You'll give us daughters this time, Eli." The world seemed to pause, the night air holding still. His throat worked as he tried to answer, but no words came. Instead, he only stared at her, struck by the audacity of her hope, her certainty in a future he hadn't dared dream of. Finally he managed, "You speak as though it's already written." "It is," she said, firm, "because I won't be broken, and you won't be alone. Not anymore." Her hand lingered in his, and Eli didn't pull away. For the first time in years, he let the silence settle not as a shield but as something warm, something alive. Above them, the stars burned bright and eternal, but it was the fire kindling inside Eli Cartwright that gave him strength, the promise of a life rebuilt, not just endured. Tomorrow would bring hunters, danger, perhaps even death. But tonight, under the vast Wyoming sky, there was a fragile peace between them, and a promise that carried more weight than any bullet. Dawn broke with a pale wash of light, the aspens glowing like ghostly sentries, as Eli tightened the straps of his pack. Mara sat on a fallen log, ankle-bound but face steady, watching him work. Her grey eyes carried both exhaustion and something stronger, resolve. "We can't stay," Eli said, voice rough from the night. "They'll circle back. Tucker's men don't give up easy." Mara nodded once. "Then where?" Eli paused, scanning the ridgeline. The decision weighed heavy, but the answer was clear. "There's a valley east, hidden past the high ridges. Used to trap there when I was younger. Few families still live out that way. Folks who don't care much for lawmen or barons." Her brows lifted. "You trust them?" "Trust?" Eli gave a short, grim laugh. No, but I know 'em, and they know me. That'll have to be enough. The climb tested them both. Mara leaned on a staff Eli had cut from pine, each step heavy with the burden of her swollen ankle. Eli kept close, steadying her when she stumbled. The path was rough, narrow, with cliffs yawning below and hawks circling above. Sweat burned down his back despite the chill air. By midday, the valley opened before them like a secret kept by the mountains. Green meadows stretched wide, broken by a ribbon of river, and smoke curled from chimneys of scattered cabins. Children's laughter carried faintly on the wind. Mara drew a sharp breath. It's beautiful. Eli's gaze softened, though he tried to hide it. It's hidden. That's what matters. As they descended, a pair of riders approached, rifles across their saddles. Eli recognized them, Calder and Ruth Hensley, homesteaders toughened by hard winters and harder living. Calder's weathered face broke into a grin. Cartwright. Thought you were dead or gone. Not yet, Eli answered. Got company. Ruth's sharp eyes studied Mara from head to toe. She's a tall drink of water. You bring in trouble with her. Mara straightened despite her limp, her voice calm. Trouble found me long before I met him. Ruth's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but not scorn either. She glanced at Eli. We'll hear the story later. For now, you'll need a roof. Old Miller cabin's empty since last spring. You two can set there. Relief loosened something in Eli's chest he hadn't realized was knotted. Obliged, he said. They followed Ruth and Calder into the valley. Neighbors waved cautiously, curiosity bright in their eyes. Mara walked tall despite her pain, refusing to shrink under their stares. Eli noticed the way children whispered, pointing at her height. But he also saw how Mara's lips curved faintly, almost proud. At the Miller cabin, they found 4 walls, a hearth and dust thick enough to choke on. Mara coughed, then laughed, the sound surprising even herself. Better than the hut. Eli glanced at her, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir close to hope. He set his rifle against the wall, the weight on his shoulders easing just a little. That night they sat by the fire, the valley quiet outside. Mara's ankle rested on a stool, her fingers tracing the rough grain of the table. You think they'll stand with us, if Tucker comes? Eli's eyes lingered on the flames. They're valley folk. They stand for their own. If we prove ourselves worth standing with, maybe. She leaned back, the firelight soft on her face. Then we'd better prove it. Eli met her gaze, and for the first time, he didn't see a fugitive in his cabin. He saw a partner, someone who refused to bow, who carried strength enough to match his own. Outside, the valley slept, but Eli Cartwright knew the peace was fragile. Trouble would come. The question was whether this hidden place had enough iron to withstand it. The valley mornings came softer than the high ridges, sunlight spilling gold across the meadows, the river singing its steady tune. Eli rose before dawn, as always, chopping wood and checking the fences near the Miller cabin. But now when he returned, he found more than silence waiting inside. Mara was there, bent over the hearth, coaxing fire from embers, her tall frame moving with quiet determination. You're up early, he muttered, setting the wood down. I couldn't sleep. She lifted her chin toward the empty shelves. This place isn't a home yet. It feels hollow, needs work. Eli grunted, though her words struck true. The Miller cabin was shelter, nothing more. If they meant to stay, it had to be something greater. The next days blurred into labor. Eli split timbers and mended the sagging roof, while Mara scrubbed the floors, patched windows, and spread quilts she'd stitched from scraps. She moved slower on her swollen ankle, but she refused to rest more than a moment at a time. One afternoon, Eli found her in the yard, sleeves rolled, trying to dig a garden bed despite the strain on her ribs. You'll tear yourself apart, he growled, snatching the hoe from her hands. She straightened, sweat beading on her brow. Then let me. I've spent too many years being told to sit pretty and wait. I want to work, to build. Eli's scowl softened. He thrust the hoe into the dirt and handed her a smaller spade. Then dig, but don't be fool enough to think you're doing it alone. The days wore on, and slowly the cabin shifted. Smoke rose steady from the chimney. Fresh-cut boards gleamed where rot once spread. Mara's quilt draped the bed, her stitching uneven but sturdy. Their hands carved life into the hollow space, piece by piece. One evening, as twilight brushed the valley, Eli sat whittling on the porch, carving the shape of a horse small enough to fit in a child's palm. Mara stepped outside, watching quietly. "You still carve for him?" she asked softly. Eli's jaw tightened. "Habit." She moved closer, brushing sawdust from his arm. "It's more than habit. It's love that doesn't vanish even when the person's gone." He swallowed hard, staring at the half-shaped horse. After a long silence, he asked, "And you? Why fight so hard to build here?" Mara's eyes lifted to the horizon, where the mountains glowed violet in the fading light. "Because I've never had a place that was mine. Not my father's house, not Tucker's promise. Here, maybe I can belong." "Maybe we both can." Her words pierced him deeper than any knife. He turned the carving in his hands, then looked at her, the firelight flickering in her grey eyes. "Mara," he said slowly, "you've carried more weight than most men I know. You've walked through fire and didn't bow, and I've lived too long in the ashes. But if you'll stay, if you'll have it, I'd like to make this cabin more than shelter. I'd like to make it a home. With you." For a moment she only stared, her breath catching. Then her lips curved into the faintest smile, trembling but real. "Yes, Eli. I'll stay." The night deepened around them, stars peeking through the indigo sky. Inside, the cabin walls no longer felt hollow. They carried laughter, warmth, and a fragile dream, one that belonged to both of them. The valley had grown into something like peace. Smoke lifted from chimneys, children played by the river, and Eli almost allowed himself to believe the worst had passed. But peace in the west was fragile, and he felt it breaking long before the sound of hooves carried through the meadows. Dust rose in the distance, a line of riders cutting across the horizon. At their head rode Jedediah Tucker, broad as a bull, his eyes hungry with ownership and rage. Behind him, a dozen hired guns fanned out, rifles glinting in the sun. Eli stood at the cabin door, rifle in hand, his body rigid. Mara came beside him, tall and unbending, though her ankle still bore the stiffness of healing. Her voice was calm, though steel ran through it. "He's here. I see him." Eli's jaw locked. "Stay behind me." "I won't hide," she replied, her grey eyes sharp. "Not now." The riders halted at the edge of the clearing, horses stamping. Tucker dismounted slow, deliberate, every step meant to show his control. His voice carried across the meadow, deep and venomous. "Cartwright, you've got something of mine. Hand her over and maybe I let you keep breathing." Eli raised his rifle. "She's not yours. Never was." A low laugh rolled from Tucker, cruel and certain. "Everything in this valley is mine, mountain man. Land, cattle, water, and her. Promised to me by her own blood. You think you can steal what I paid for?" Mara stepped forward, shoulders squared. "I am not property, Jedediah. Not yours, not anyone's." The Baron's face twisted, fury boiling. "You'll regret that mouth, girl." He turned to Eli, spitting. "I'll burn this whole valley down before I let her slip through my hands." Behind Tucker, the gunmen shifted, hands on triggers, but the valley folk were not blind. Calder Hensley, Ruth, and others emerged from their cabins, rifles leveled. One by one, neighbors stepped into the clearing, forming a line behind Eli and Mara. "You'll not burn us out, Tucker," Ruth called. "We stand with them." The cattle baron sneered. "Fools. You think a handful of dirt farmers can stand against me? I own the law." A new voice cut across the tension. "Not anymore." Sheriff Silas Boone rode into the clearing, a parchment in his hand and a deputy at his side. His badge gleamed in the sun. "Jedediah Tucker, by order of the federal marshal, you're under arrest for murder, extortion, and unlawful claims of property." The crowd murmured, shock rippling through the valley. Tucker's face darkened, disbelief flashing to rage. "You don't have the spine, Boone. You never did." Silas held the parchment higher. "This isn't about me. This is the United States government, And for once, money won't buy your way out. For a heartbeat, the meadow held its breath. Then Tucker roared, reaching for his pistol. But Eli was faster. His rifle barked, the shot cracking the silence. The bullet struck the ground at Tucker's feet, close enough to kick dust over his boots. "Try it," Eli growled, eyes hard as flint. The gunman hesitated, uncertain. Facing Eli alone might have been simple. Facing him, Mara's unyielding stance, the rifles of the valley folk and the law at their back, that was different. One by one, Tucker's men lowered their weapons. Their loyalty had never been to him, only to the coin he promised, and coin didn't spend from the gallows. Silas stepped forward, binding Tucker's hands. The Baron cursed, spat, fought, but it was no use. For the first time, his power meant nothing. Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she held, her hand brushing Eli's arm. His muscles eased, the weight of years lifting if only a little. The valley was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence. It was stronger, forged by defiance, by unity, by the refusal to bow. And for the first time, Eli Cartwright believed peace might just hold. The valley felt different after Tucker's arrest. Lighter, quieter, like a storm had passed and the sun could finally break through. The news had spread quickly, and people gathered around the Miller cabin, the low murmur of voices carrying in the crisp morning air. Eli, leaning against the porch post, watched the crowd with cautious eyes. The valley folk had never been cowards. But there was always a price for standing against a man like Tucker. That price had been paid, and it would leave scars. Eli knew that, even if it was a price worth paying. Mara stood beside him, her gaze steady on the faces around them. She hadn't yet smiled, not the way she used to back when they first met, but there was a softness in her eyes. The weight had shifted, just slightly, and maybe it was enough for now. Calder Hensley approached, his rough hand outstretched. "You and the girl, Mara, she done more than give us a fight. She gave us a chance. We stand with you, Eli. You don't have to carry that alone." Eli shook Calder's hand, firm, but his voice was low. "This valley's stronger than one man's greed. It always was." Ruth joined them, her arms crossed, but the familiar hardness in her face had softened. "Don't take this wrong, Eli," she said, her tone gruff but sincere. "But I think Mara's the best thing you could have ever found." Mara turned, surprised by the compliment. "I'm just trying to make something real, Ruth. Something worth fighting for." "And you have," Ruth said, her smile brief but honest. "This place, you've given us something to believe in again." "We'll hold it for you." Eli nodded, but the weight of it lingered. Holding the valley together wasn't simple. It wasn't enough to put down one man's tyranny. It was about keeping the land alive, keeping the community strong. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, Eli and Mara sat on the porch together, the valley quiet except for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The valley was no longer a place to hide. It was a place to grow, to rebuild. And as they sat side by side, the weight of what they'd fought for began to settle into something like peace. "You still carve?" Mara asked, glancing at the small figures of animals and birds strewn across the table. Eli nodded, taking one of the small carvings between his fingers. "More than I ever did. But I don't carve just for my boy anymore." She studied him, her eyes warm. "And what do you carve for now?" "For the valley," he answered, the words slipping out before he could think better of it. "For us. For a future that's not just surviving. Something worth leaving behind." Mara smiled, and this time it wasn't a faint curve. It was real, a smile that held the promise of everything they had built and everything yet to come. "Then we'll build it together." Eli exhaled, the weight in his chest easing, and he looked at the valley stretching before him, the land they would tend, protect, and make their own. It wouldn't be easy, it would never be simple, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Above them, the stars began to shine bright and steady as the world slowly turned, and for the first time in a long while, Eli felt the hope of a new season, one where the past didn't hold him back, and the future was something to build, not run from. A year had passed since the fire, since the valley had been shaken by the arrival of Jedediah Tucker's men and the storm that followed. Seasons changed, and the land had healed in ways the people had not expected. The mountain breeze felt different now, warmer, filled with the scent of fresh earth, pine, and wildflowers. Eli Cartwright stood at the edge of the cabin, his rifle resting against the porch railing, as he watched the valley breathe in the early morning light. Mara was inside, humming softly as she worked. It wasn't a tune he recognized, but it was hers. Their daughter, Grace, played at her feet, building something with blocks she'd found in the shed. Her laughter was a sound Eli hadn't realized he'd missed until it became a part of their daily rhythm. Mara had been right all along. It wasn't just surviving, it was living. "Daddy!" Grace called, her voice high and sweet as she rushed to his side, her tiny hand gripping his fingers. Eli crouched down, ruffling her dark hair. "What are you building today, little one?" "House," she declared, holding up a wooden block with a proud grin. "That's a fine house," Eli said, his voice full of warmth. "Maybe one day you'll build a whole town." Grace giggled, looking up at her mother who had come to join them. Mara stood there, taller than most, but in that moment her smile made her seem smaller, softer, tied to this place, to the life they had forged together. Mara knelt beside Grace and took her hand. "Let's go inside, sweetheart. We've got work to do." Eli stood slowly, feeling the weight of the years fall away piece by piece. The man who had first crossed paths with Mara Lindstrom, the man who had run from life, had changed. The land had changed him. And now, standing here with his daughter and his wife, his family, he knew it wasn't just the seasons that had passed. It was something deeper. Inside, the fire crackled, and the scent of fresh-baked bread filled the air. Eli leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Grace and Mara moved together like two halves of a whole, their laughter weaving between the small cabin's walls. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt at peace, not because the world was perfect, but because it was theirs. Mara caught his gaze and smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. She hadn't just brought warmth back into the cabin, she had brought life. "Come sit with us," she said, her voice gentle but insistent. "We've got bread fresh out of the oven." Eli nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. He walked over and sat beside her, Grace already climbing into his lap, her small hands covered in flour as she offered him a piece of bread. "It's warm," Grace said with wide eyes. "I can tell," Eli chuckled, taking the bread and breaking off a small piece. It wasn't much, a cabin, some land, and a family, but it was everything. The years of struggle, of hiding, of running, had come to this moment. And it wasn't just a quiet evening around the fire, it was a declaration. The past had tried to break them, but together they were unshakable. The valley outside remained as it always had, a patch of earth tucked into the arms of the mountains, but inside that small cabin, the future was already being built. And when Eli looked at Mara, when he saw their daughter's bright eyes and heard the quiet hum of the life they'd made together, he realized something. There was a place for him in this world, one that was no longer defined by loss, but by love. He pressed a kiss to Mara's temple, and she leaned into him, her heart in the same rhythm as his. "You were right," he whispered. "This time we're building something that'll last. Something worth fighting for," she answered, her voice a quiet promise. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Eli Cartwright knew the fight was over. They had already won.